Good day and welcome. One night I was sleeping and my mind was kind of wandering and I thought about books that I've read. And when I actually sat and thought about it, I've been reading for 45 years. And over the course of that, I've read a significantly large number of books. And just going through some books I like, some books I don't like. And I thought, well, it might be worthwhile to do some recordings and talk about books that I like. But then I thought about it, and the thing that I thought is that really, before I talk about books that I like, it's important to know what kind of books I read and what kind of books I don't read. Because if you don't like my taste in books, then obviously my reviews aren't really going to do you much good. So I'm going to be focused around science fiction and fantasy books. And just for perspective, I started reading in the late 70s, early 80s. And so that's where most of the books that I read are going to come from. So, what do I like? And the short answer is I was reading Raymond Feist's Introduction to Magician, and he talks about a book that's a ripping good yarn, which is to say, it's a story that reads really well. The plot's not particularly intrusive, and you just kind of read it and go through it, and events happen, and you're interested in the events that happen, and you're interested in the people that they happen to. So that's kind of one of my key things for enjoying a book is it needs to be fun to read. I work an office job at a large company, so I have to deal with a lot of politicking, obviously, and looking at a lot of politicking in a book is just it's not interesting because either the book's going to read like, no, this isn't what really happens, this isn't how it looks, or it's going to be like, yeah, this is exactly like going to work every day, and I already go to work every day, so I'm not going to read just to experience work, which I have to do every day. The other thing that I really like is, characters that you want to hear their story. I do a lot of grimdark fantasy reading, so that doesn't mean these have to be nice or likable or good characters, but they have to be characters that you're interested in what happens to them next. And that kind of flows into the ripping good yarn commentary, where it's a good story, it's interesting to tell, it's about characters you maybe don't like but you can kind of sympathize with, or they're interesting and you want to learn more about them, and so you listen to the story. So what are some of the things I don't like? I mean, there's uh, one really specific thing. When I was reading books in the 90s, they had this thing where the main antagonist would be kind of on screen with the protagonist. They'd be in the same group, or someone that was pretty much unavoidable and spent a lot of time on screen. And generally speaking, when that happened, the main antagonist was really, really, really irritating. And you knew at the end of the book they were going to get their comeuppance, and the protagonist would win, or if not win, at least advance their cause. But meanwhile, you had to slog through however many 100 pages of the book with this character that was the antagonist, who was just absolutely loathsome. You hated them, you didn't want them anywhere, and they got tons and tons of screen time. It's just like, look, that's not fun to read. That's not something enjoyable to read. And there's a number of books that I thought were really enjoyable, except for having the antagonist on screen. It's just like, I can't read this anymore. Another thing is, and I talk about, kind of the opposite of a book you want to read, is when characters do stupid things for strange reasons. Um, and so this might mean, someone does something because they have certain ethical considerations. And, on the one hand, you get it. People have ethics and they do stupid things for ethical or emotional reasons. I certainly am not innocent of doing that. But on the other hand, do you really want to read a story where the entire plot is driven by the character being stupid or stubborn or irritating? No. Is there a good way to put ethical decisions in that cause the story to be interesting, and an interesting discussion of, well, what do these ethics really mean? Yeah, there's absolutely ways to do that. um, Unfortunately, people don't always do that, and that kind of gets into the next point where I talk about where the plot is intrusive. And by that I mean, certain events happen because they are required by the plot. There's no, when you're reading them, it kind of breaks your immersion. It's like, well, why did this just happen? Oh, that's right. This just happened because the plot needs to move forward, or the plot needs to happen, or whatever. And when you start thinking about the meta of how the book is proceeding instead of immersing yourself in the story, then you're moving out of a fun book that's good to read, and a book where things happen for meta reasons. So nope, don't like that. And then one problem I've had with a lot of recent books I've read is, they do the world building. They introduce you to the characters. They introduce you to the logic of the world. Given that we're reading science fiction and fantasy, that's very important. Where is this fantasy world? If it's science fiction, what scientific advances have occurred, and why are these scientific advances important? And so the author will lay out their world, and I'm very excited and enthusiastic about that. And there'll be plot driving along as well. The story will be happening, but then at some point they'll switch out of world building. They'll have their scenario is set up, maybe 50 pages, 100 pages in, however long it takes. The less intrusive the world building is, the longer it takes to kind of get that sense of place, because there's plot happening and the author isn't doing like massive info dumps, which there's a place for massive info dumps in a book. Those can be also immersion breaking, but it depends on the skill of the author making them happen. But then at some point the world is built, and then the main plot of the story kind of starts to move to the front, and takes control of the narrative. And there have been a number of recent books where I'm looking at the world building saying, wow, this world building is absolutely awesome. I love it. And then they start talking about the plot of the book. I'm like, I'm not interested in this plot, for whatever reasons. It's just at some point, 100, 150 pages in, I'll just be like, I'm not interested in these characters, and I'm not interested what happens to them. Interestingly, there was a book that I was reading that I got about halfway, 2/3 of the way through, and I was just like, I know how this book's going to end. I just can't read anymore. I'm not going to slog through 100 pages to get to this ending that I know is going to happen. And it was also happening because the character was being stubborn and just refusing to accept fate. No, I'm going to fight fate and win. Which, yeah, people that do that are interesting. You don't want to